Welcome to GMFC Studios, God's production company.
Welcome to another episode of Coffee with the Bishop. I'm your host, Bishop Roy Jesse Lyson, pastor of Grace and Mercy Fellowship Center here in the city of Columbus, and Senior Vice Bishop of Greater Emmanuel Fellowship International. I'm really over the edge, over the top with my guest today. He's a good brother, a very good friend, and he's the public safety director for the city of Columbus. None other than Robert Clark, Dr. Robert Clark, who very soon is going to be Dr. Robert Clark. Welcome to Coffee with the Bishop.
Thank you, my friend. It's a pleasure to be with you.
We met over an incident that happened to my son. He got injured, and you had stretched out an olive branch. Didn't know me from Adam, but you just felt compelled to reach out, and our relationship has developed from that interaction. And I'm so thankful to God for you, for God bringing you into my life, and for the relationship He's allowed us to develop ever since that incident.
Right.
Coming up not too shy of a year now. In that time, we've learned a lot about each other.
We have.
One of the most amazing things that I've learned about you is the phenomenal testimony that you have. And the Bible tells us that we overcome by the word of our testimony. It's important that other people understand that maybe what they're dealing with in life
Right.
isn't as isolated to just them as most often we feel when we're going through some trauma and
Right.
trying to figure out what's next for me.
Right.
If you wouldn't mind, can you just share a little bit of your testimony so that our viewers can have an idea of not only where you've come from, but where God has brought you through, what He's brought you through and where He's brought you to?
Yeah, it's been a humbling experience. At 56 years old, I sit before you today as a man of God and a man of faith because I've seen God work in my life. Back to when I was just a young person, 4 years old, and having spent 8 years in foster care simply because my biracial parents didn't want to be parents and just didn't know what to do with me in the mid-60s, an Italian mother, an African-American father, so I spent 8 years in foster care. And my parents would come and go, seasons would change before they would come, and suffered untold things and abuse and neglect and abandonment just waiting for them to show up to pick me up and take me home. And eventually they did that. When I was 12 years old, they picked me and my sister up and took us home. And tragically enough, 6 months later, my father was murdered when I was 13 years old, January 15th, 1980, at 9:15 p.m. It's not like I remember that date and that time at all, right? But God began to work in my life and really forging me, if you will. That's how I feel about it now, forging me and preparing for a life of service. Because I do understand and I do relate the things that are happening in our communities because they happened to me. The individual that killed my father was never accounted for. There's no justice, no closure, and I suffered with that pain for a long time because I wanted someone to pay for my loss. My father was Superman, as many children's father is, and he was gone, and I just didn't know what I was going to do and felt like I had no direction. But not understanding that at 13 years old, when I closed the door after talking with the police, after they told me my father had been shot and killed, that God was putting me on a path that would lead me here to the city of Columbus. And I'm so honored and so proud to serve as a director of public safety, particularly at this moment in time, and this moment in history, which I say that this is not just a movement, it's a moment. It's a moment for us to bring our communities back together, bring our public service entities back together in a service-oriented way. And it all began just in my life in the things that I had to overcome from the age of 4, 13, and the things that I had to, again, forge through with the grace and covering of God.
So, obviously, it's painful to deal with some of the things that you've dealt with in your life. Tragically, getting the news from the police that your father is not only murdered, but that to this day it's an unsolved cold case.
Yeah, the individual who was responsible for murdering my father was not held accountable. And I actually had a conversation with the police officer who investigated my father's case, because he was still there when I joined that very same police department many years later. And he said, Robert, we were just glad your father was gone. The case was not investigated. My father was on the wrong side of the law. And far too often the case, they were just glad that he was gone and they didn't have to deal with him anymore. Not realizing the impact that it had on me as a son, on our family, financially. We had to move. It was a challenge for my mother to send me to Catholic school. I had to find a sponsor to be able to pay for me to go to Cardinal Mooney High School, of which I've always been eternally grateful to be able to receive that Catholic-based education, which my mother could not afford at that time in 1980, if you can imagine. So I had people in my life who really built into me and poured into me. But one of the things that I say in my own mentoring program is that hurt people hurt people. And I realized through my teenage years into my early adult years that I was actually hurting myself because I was hurt, because of the things that happened to me, and was not able to process that. That's why I'm a tremendous advocate for mental health services and mental health engagement and being able to be healthy mentally. And we have to erase the stigma associated with mental health and not seeking mental health guidance and help, and allow it to have the same importance that athletic prowess has and athletic readiness and athletic health has, but mental health is extremely important, particularly for the Black and brown community.
It's a beauty that you say that, because I mean, right, as you know, right now in the city of Columbus, there's a big push towards all the pillars of what we call whole health for the body, spiritual, mental, social, and psychological.
Right.
And you said that hurting people hurt people, and that is so true of a statement, because oftentimes people don't even realize that they're taking their pain and pushing that pain on others.
That's correct.
As a way of releasing it. There's one thing that I've shared in ministry. God created us to give life. So we are life-giving beings. That's what God created. When He breathed into the nostrils of Adam, He breathed in life.
Amen.
The, I guess, caveat to that is everything you bury in yourself then has to live. You bury it to kill it, but you're putting it in something that's made to produce life. So you keep giving life to it. And that's why services like what you're talking about are so vital.
Absolutely.
But that stigma, how do we get past that stigma of, it's easy to cry in the corner where nobody sees you, but to be in the place where you can cry without shame in front of people. How do we get there?
I think one of the ways is the way we message our own pains and our own hurts, particularly those of us in positions of influence, athletes, actors, individuals that are certainly our young people look up to be able to say, I want to be healthy and whole. I want to address my mental health issues. If it requires medication, if it requires psychotherapy, I'm not afraid to be forward-leaning with that. That's why I've been so forward-leaning and very transparent about what has happened to me in my life, because I recognize that there are those who are listening to me and will relate to either crime and violence happening in your family or mental health issues or whatever the case may be, and be able to connect with the fact that here's an individual of prominence that is very transparent with the challenges that they've had, the forging that they've had, to be able to provide that testimony later on. And I'm very transparent with that, and have been in my mentoring programs, when I speak to kids, in my law enforcement career. I'm very transparent and very forward-leaning with that, because I know that that will empower others.
So you weren't born perfect.
No, absolutely not.
and you've got some issues in your life that you've had to work through.
Amen. Still working through.
So you may be going through something right now.
Right.
This is a witness that whatever you're dealing with can be dealt with, and that there's a positive way to do it. You put purpose behind your pain.
That's absolutely correct. One of the things that I share, and I will share this with all of the viewing audience, is that I'm a Christian under construction, and some days the workers are off. And I know that I need to continue working at it, and thank God I know Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior in my life, because I need to return to the altar of grace every single day for replenishment, because I know that I am imperfect. I know that I am a hurting person incomplete person, and I know I need to pursue that sort of grace and forgiveness every single day in my life so that I can be a better person, a better father to my children, a better example to my children than what I had. I have 2 adult daughters that I love phenomenally. And again, if I've ever done anything perfect in this life, it would be to have the 2 daughters that I have. And I'm so proud of them and proud of what they're accomplishing and overcoming. And I just want to be a good example to them. I come from a very imperfect place, but again, I know that God has had the covering over my life. And one of the things that I say quite frequently is that I used to be a Christian who had his Christianity in a mason jar that I put up on a shelf. And when things were happening in my life, I would go and get that jar and I would open it and I would rub some Christianity on whatever it was that I had to deal with, whether it was a test in school or a job interview or challenges in my life. And then once it was solved, I would put the jar back on the shelf and then go about whatever I was doing. But then I realized very, very early that I couldn't put it back on the shelf, that I had to live that way every day, apply it that way every day, and just be able to model and example that in my life in every day in every way that I can so that it becomes real, not just for myself, but for others.
One of your functions, right in line with that, one of your functions as the safety director is to not just manage, police, fire, and these first responder services, but it's to engage community. And a lot of the engagement with community has to do with faith-based organizations, churches, and things of that nature. I'm a firm believer that the government can't fix our problems by itself. The church can't fix all of our problems by itself.
Right.
We have to come together. How do you think that looks, or what is it that we can do as a church community and as a government community coming together so that we can help better solve some of the issues that are in our own communities?
Well, one of the things that I would share with you is that we are in an era of transformation and reform. And it's important to understand that a part of that transformation and that reform involves the relationships between the faith-based community and the community, faith-based community and government, so that we can be more collaborative and we can example the messaging that we're really trying to bring across. We're in a different era today, the way technology impacts the way we communicate. I always say jokingly that I grew up in an era when your favorite show came on television, whether it was Good Times or The Jeffersons or Sanford and Son. You had to wait every week for it to come on again. Now we have everything immediate. Everything is immediate, and we have this expectation of immediacy. Immediacy with acquisition of information, immediacy with solving problems, immediacy with meeting our own needs. And we have to return to a place where there's a such thing as patience. Here's what I use with kids when I mentor them. I ask all these kids, do you know what layaway is? You and I understand layaway. You would go to the store and your mom and dad would put stuff on layaway. And many times when you got it out of layaway, it didn't fit anymore. And it was probably not even in the store anymore, but you had to wait. You learned patience. We have to return to a process and a system of learning patience. Patience with ourselves, patience with each other, and tolerance for each other to reduce the violence that we have, particularly among our young people, because they have no patience for anything and they want to solve so many of their issues with violence and guns and bullying. We have to return, and I think the church can help us do that. I know government's supportive, and when we come together and be able to model that engagement, model those examples, and model this process of patience and tolerance and building towards better solutions that are based in equality and equity. That's what our society is looking for, equality and equity. And between that runs the empowerment of voice and being able to be heard and being able to hear others.
So, if we don't agree on something, does that make us enemies?
Well, from what we see in our society today, you would think so. But clearly that's not the case. There's obviously space for us to be different. America is made up of different people, different cultures, different religions, different communities. And of course, I come from an era where if we hung out on the front porch. And I tell my young people that I grew up in a front porch era. We now live in a back porch era. And what does that mean? That all the activity in our homes and neighborhoods take place on the back porch. When I grew up, unfortunately, everything took place on the front porch. That also means getting in trouble down at Miss Emma May's house and getting whoopings all the way home, and then getting in trouble when I got home. So it's important to understand that that's where we are in terms of engagement with each other from a back porch mentality, and we have to return to that front porch mentality so that we can have those engagements and that accountability for one another.
So when we talk about accountability, accountability goes both ways. So the community wants to hold the government accountable for, fixing everything. The government expects the community to be accountable for being involved in the process to fixing things. And it seems like we all talk about accountability while at the same time no one's really being held accountable. So how can we get beyond where we are now, where we kind of know some of the things that need to be done to fix some of the issues that we have, but get from just knowing it to actually applying what it is that we know?
Yeah, we have to return to a process where we hear each other, right? And not just hearing to respond. And that involves community groups or community organizers, certainly government entities. Return to a space where we hear to understand each other and not just hear each other. And then respond to that in an accountable, transparent, and equitable way so that we can address the issues that are facing our communities, particularly our youth, our kids who are trying to go back to school and learn without fear. There's an opportunity for us to return to what I would call some of those old school ways of being, certainly those old school ways of holding each other accountable, and most importantly, supporting each other.
We look at, in the city of Columbus, last year, 2021, highest murder rate in the history of the city. We look at the news today, and while the numbers seem to be getting better, we're still hearing about people getting killed left and right. How can the church or the community come together? What programs or what processes are in place that the community can get behind to try to stem some of the violence that we're seeing?
Yeah, well, I would say from a perspective of having run my own mentoring program, the church being able to sponsor and be engaged and facilitate mentorship and demonstrating or having adults in the church, whether they are members or not, engage with the youth to be able to mentor to them and provide them with examples. Here's what I would share with you. In my mentoring program, when I first started a long time ago, I realized that children had a tremendous inability to be what they could not see. And what do they dream about? What do they hope to be? So I engaged this young man who was a phenomenal cartoon artist, but he was afraid to disclose that to anyone because the neighborhood he grew up in was a gang-infested neighborhood, and he was afraid for gang members to see that he was a cartoonist. But I was able to connect him with a person who was in the newspaper business, responsible for cartoon arts in the newspaper, and then he got an internship as a cartoonist. But he didn't know how. He didn't know what the process was. So all of his hopes and dreams just existed in that notebook, and he was afraid to share that with anyone. The church can be extremely instrumental in this because they have the space, they certainly have the members or those in the community who can just come and impart into our young people what it means, not just to be a doctor and a lawyer or things like that, but other things that they can be, an engineer, being able to explain to our children what it means to be an architect and sit down with them. And one of the things that we've learned in mentorship is before you tell me what you are, tell me how you became what you are. Tell me what the path was. Tell me what the process was. Don't just tell me that you're director of public safety. Tell me how you became the director of public safety. In other words, provide them with the roadmap. Provide them with milestones that they can follow, things that they can achieve so that they can then see themselves on the path to these positions and to these opportunities, and restoring hope that they'll be able to do it.
So you're talking about bringing context to the goal. How do I get there?
A roadmap, being able to provide them with a roadmap, because so many kids are challenged to understand how I can be something. I'll use this as an example, and I hate this example, but it's very clear. And that's going to the NFL or going to the NBA. They understand the path. I play sports, and when I'm 5 years old, I go to summer camps. I continue to train. I play, Pee Wee League, and I play in middle school and high school, and try to go to a D1 college. They understand what the path is because of what they see, but they don't understand the pathways to many, many other professions, particularly collegiate professions. Also, being able to model for them what it means in a path in the trades, because that's what our children are not aware of, what it means to be an electrician, a plumber, someone who's qualified in HVAC systems. Those individuals are making a lot of money, but what's the path?
It's really interesting when you think about how you get to your end. We were talking earlier, and we were talking about the glorious end to our story in the sense of getting the job or accomplishing whatever it is you set out to accomplish. And had you realized what it was going to cost you, you may have changed your end goals because sometimes that process can be difficult.
Right.
But you've pressed through that process and been very successful in your life, not without hardship.
No, not at all. And please don't misunderstand me. There were plenty of times I fell down, plenty of times that I failed, plenty of times that I didn't get jobs that I applied for, but I kept persevering. I kept seeing it through as I learned as a man in a fraternity. It is important to understand what seeing it through means. You have to get back up. It's said quite frequently that the world doesn't care how you get knocked down or how many times you get knocked down. They only care how you get up. And being able to demonstrate getting up and moving on and persevering. There were classes that were difficult for me. I persevered. I got the help. I was not afraid to ask for help. That's the other thing that I want to encourage our listeners and certainly our young people. Don't be afraid to ask for help. There are people out there to help you, those who can encourage you, those who can support you, those who can mentor you. You just have to position yourself for the help and ask for it.
I remember the story of the crippled man. And the angel would come down and trouble the water. And if you were the first one to get into that pool, you would be healed.
Right.
And this man had been there for years, could never get to the pool. Jesus comes along, talks to him, and gets him to the place of understanding that he didn't get to the pool because he didn't try to get himself to that pool.
Right.
How can we get our youth and even some of the adults to a place of understanding that, almost in the sense of like what President Kennedy said in one of his speeches, don't ask what the country can do for you, ask what you can do for the country.
Right.
What can we do for our city? How can we get involved besides the mentorship and the government kind of giving us a path to success? What other things can we do to kind of stem the violence, to get control back over our communities, to stop some of the senseless trade of illegal drugs and all the different things going on?
Yeah, Bishop, one of the things that I want to point out and make sure that our listeners understand is that within the Division of Police in Columbus and certainly in the Division of Fire, there are women and men doing a phenomenal job every single day. And they don't get the attention they deserve. They don't get the accolades or the applause that they deserve. But they are doing phenomenal things in the lives of our residents, in the lives of our children, in our communities that goes unheralded and unseen most of the time. Here's what I believe. I believe that inspiration seeds motivation. We have to return to inspiration, inspiring those to become motivated to do something different, to accept responsibility. I believe that we are in a position to meet people where they are. That's what I say constantly. God meets me where I am. God meets you where you are. We have to meet these individuals, these residents, these kids right where they are and then provide them with inspiration, provide them with hope, so that they then become motivated to do something better and move away from the things that are challenging our youth: crime, violence, human trafficking, bullying, drug addiction, overdoses, experimentation with a lot of things, focusing so much on social media and TikTok and what's the next trend that they're going to try. We have to begin to see that inspiration so that it provides them with the motivation to do something different.
I tell you, your story by itself is extremely inspiring. And then coming to know you, just our friendship is inspiring to me. How can we build better relationships with each other, from discipline to discipline, cross-discipline, from community to community? What does that look like to you?
I think we have to be unafraid to get out of our own silos, our personal silos, our organizational silos, our faith and belief silos, and begin to communicate across neighborhoods, across organizations, because we all have a part and a role to play. This is not something we can accomplish alone. This is something we need to accomplish together. And everyone right where you are is able to do something. I always say this constantly at meetings and mentoring programs. You know someone else who should be here. You know someone else that you should be talking to. So we have a responsibility to do that. You know, each one teach one, each one reach one. We hear this constantly. But what does that mean? What kind of call to action is that for each one to teach one and each one to reach one? And just taking on that responsibility, beginning in our own homes. Here's what I would also say. We've moved beyond the era of storytelling. You and I are old enough to remember when we would sit around and Grandma or Uncle Charlie would sit around and tell these great stories. That was our entertainment, because most of the time those 3 channels, there was nothing on to watch. But I'm not going to talk about the 3 channels today. The storytelling, we've moved away from the storytelling, the inspiration that those stories were, because that comes from slavery times, where the elders in slave times would pass on secrets and history and culture through storytelling. So we've moved away from storytelling. We have to be able to talk about the successes in our family, the successes in our history, the successes in our neighborhoods, the successes in our culture, and be able to, again, inspire in order to motivate. So we have a responsibility to meet our young people right where they are and meet them on their level and inspire them to ascend to a different level than where they are.
Amen. You're in a tough position. Politics are all around you in your position as a leader in the city. How do you balance your own personal convictions, your faith convictions, and politics, which don't always align themselves with Scripture, so to speak? What do you do to kind of balance that out in your life?
What I do is and I say this frequently, is I remember my why every single day. Why did I come back to Ohio, to the city of Columbus, at the point in my life that I did? And it's because of my why. Because I wanted to make a difference. I believed that I had the experience, the testimony, the passion, the enthusiasm, all the things that go along with it, to be able to engage in a very substantive way, to not just lead, but to listen. I think a key component of leadership is listening to the women and men of public safety, listening to our community organizations, and constantly adhering to why I came back here. I remember 36 plus years ago when I first became a police officer, and I joke about this now, but it's kind of serious. My appointment letter said $19,999, and I was the most excited guy in the world because I knew every 2 weeks I was going to get that $500, but it was never about the money. It was about being able to make a difference. And 36 years later, I still have the same perspective. I mean, the money obviously allows me to facilitate my life and take care of my family, but it's never about the money. It's about the opportunity to make a difference in the city of Columbus and the lives of our residents and our organizations, and bring a new energy and a new passion and a new perspective and a new vision for what public safety can be as we are in this era of police reform. I don't like that term. I like policing reform, because that then positions us to work on strategy, engagements, and a lot of other things that we can then measure and be able to see the impact. So politics and all the other things will constantly be a part of the mixture, and I understand that, but I navigate through that by adhering to why I came back here, and that's to make a difference.
A lot of people would like to make a difference. Some people feel like only people in your position have the ability to make a difference. Would you accept that as being true, or would you argue that?
Well, I would argue that all day long. All of us know someone that we can meet right where they are, whether they're in trouble, sort of in trouble, kind of in trouble, in a lot of trouble, or maybe even incarcerated. We can meet people right where they are, and all of us can do that. All of us can extend that hand of support, encouragement, and helping people get back up, particularly our young people who are getting in trouble at record numbers across the country, not just here in Columbus. Meet them where they are. Yes, there will be a process and a system of accountability. That's what our country's built on, is a system of justice and accountability. But with that comes grace, comes forgiveness, comes a second chance. All of us who sit here as people of God, we're so thankful for the second chance for the 10th time. And I'm going to raise raise my hand on that second chance for the 10th time. So we have the opportunity to extend that and meet people where they are, but then provide them with an infrastructure, resources, consistency in being able to stand back up and have that second chance. And that's one of the things that we say in mentorship, that if you decide to be a mentor, you cannot be the next thing that disappoints these kids, because so many things have already disappointed them. So if you are going to commit to meeting our young people where they are, then you have to be consistent.
So you're talking about being authentic.
Authentic, absolutely. You got to be committed, because you can't be the next thing that disappoints them.
There's one thing I noticed about the youth of today. They use phrases like keeping it real or keeping it 100. They seem to have the ability that past generations didn't necessarily have to the level that they do. They can discern things extremely well. They can discern, your genuineness, or whether you're putting on the front. Now, I would argue that they're not as strong in how to deal with some things as past generations were, but their discerning ability seems to be, part and parcel above previous generations. So, when you're trying to be that change in your own community, how do you do that without not being genuine? Obviously, we're not all good at everything.
Right.
Some of us are good communicators. Some of us know how to build good relationships. Some of us are good jokesters. Some of us, are strong and have that leadership ability. And those are all great things. But if I don't really know who I am,
Right.
How can I find out who I am so I can help somebody else?
Well, this is where the family unit and the parental unit, or the adult supervision and guidance, or significant others in their lives, are just so important in being able to help them figure out who they are. We all struggled with trying to figure out who we are, back when I had an afro, which was a few years ago, when I got my Jerry curl trying to be Michael Jackson. So we were all in a struggle in figuring out who we were trying to be. So that's a natural part of growing up, but it's about having that supportive infrastructure that will help you in positive ways to determine who you are and help you determine who you want to be, and then help you get onto that path so that you can pursue those things that will help you develop into the person you want to be. And of course, that's all hard to know as a preteen and teenagers, and it changes, every 15 minutes, if not more frequently. So we understand that it has to be a process, and a process of consistency and reinforcement. When we mess up, when we make mistakes, when we get in trouble, dusting them off and helping them get back up. That was one of the things that I was very proud about the mentoring program that we developed, is that we actually had a plan for failure. When kids failed, when they got in trouble, when they failed lessons, that we didn't throw them away or kick them out of the program. We re-engaged, retooled, re-challenged them, and helped them to re-engage in the process, because once they failed, They were used to what every single thing else does, and that's throw them away. So we cannot throw them away when they fail. We have to help them get back up, even if that means being held accountable by our justice system. And in some cases, it means that. But of continuing to be engaged, because from there is where they see the authenticity, through the consistency. When you do what you say you're going to do, you are where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there. You're not using excuses and all the things that they're used to, because you got to remember, they're used to things failing them. And we can't be that way.
And you're absolutely correct when we talk about that impact that other people's failure has on somebody. You promise to do something, and whether it's legit or not, you don't follow through with it.
Right.
Even if it's legit, it impacts me. If it's not legit, it impacts me. And over time, multiplied by many people doing the same thing, you're dealing with this sense of hopelessness.
Right.
Why even bother? Why try any longer? Every time somebody promises, it falls through. This person did that, that person did that. How can we help people get beyond that place of hopelessness?
By restoring hope and demonstrating to them what hope looks like. We have a responsibility. Those of us who have been successful in education, jobs, investments, whatever our successful path is, we owe them consistency, we owe them engagement, and we owe them modeling an example. Live how you're asking them to live. Be accountable, be honest, be truthful, be consistent. We owe them those examples. And over the course of time, it's not going to happen overnight. You walk into the situation needing to realize that they mistrust what you're saying. So you have to accept that. It doesn't matter if you're an executive from the FBI. I told them I was on television. They don't care about that, because here's one of the things that we know and we say constantly. Before they care about how much you know, they care about how much you care. And once you show them how much you care, then they can begin to listen to you. They don't care how much you know, they care how much you care.
Sometimes it's difficult understanding you have to accept people where they are. Sometimes it's difficult for people to do that very thing. Mm-hmm. It's probably one of the most hindering things really in communities is the ability to see beyond somebody's fault or failure. I often tell people in our ministry we have to stop looking at people through the eyes of humanity and start to look at people through the eyes of Christ, which is the eye of love. That kind of agape love that Jesus showed the world, that he would lay his life down while the world was rejecting him.
Right.
How can we take that type of imagery and push that out upon our youth so that they can feel the love that maybe some of them have been lacking?
So here's the challenge, and this is the challenge between community and church, is that there are so many messages out there and so many pastors that don't live what they preach. I had an experience where they would not allow me to run a mentoring program with anyone other than the congregants' kids. So again, a challenge there. So we have to recognize that our children are picking up on all of these things. So you have to model and have to instruct according to the way that you live and be able to demonstrate that very clearly, because they are going to discern if what you're saying is real or not. I think we have a tremendous opportunity before us, because our children are hungry for direction, they're hungry for hope, they're hungry for finding themselves, and they're certainly hungry to be able to understand, why am I here? Why am I here? Despite all of the challenges. So working with them and then creating opportunities to have engagements with the family so that you don't return this child to a toxic environment, and getting that supportive infrastructure to the extent that you can. I know there are challenges with all of that, but there are programs and resources that can help with that as well. But being able to provide that path where they can clearly begin to see, if I take this step, I can be successful. I'll give you an example. In my mentoring program, the very first thing we talked about is time, and the concept of time. Most children don't wear a watch today. How do they tell time? On their phone, because they don't have a concept of time. So helping them understand what being on time means. Before you can be successful, you have to be on time. You have to be on time for school. One of the things that we were advocates for is that we did not do educational mentoring or educational tutoring. We brought people in to do that. And here's why. I teach you how to be a better student. Teachers will teach you the information you need to learn. I need you to be on time. I need you to be responsible. I need you to be engaged. I need you to be present. Those are the things that we taught within the mentoring program so that they could ultimately be better students. And as soon as they could understand the process and have the infrastructure towards success and restoration of hope, and even the process of accountability, they actually want that. They actually want discipline and accountability because, again, before I care how much you know, I want to know how much you care.
We talked about failure a few moments ago. One of the expressions that I use connected to failure is not defeat. It's an opportunity for growth.
Right.
We look at some of the greatest whatevers in the world, the Michael Jordans, the Tiger Woods,
Right.
all of them have failed.
Right.
The best slugger in baseball with a 400 batting average means he's failed 600% of the time,
Right.
700% of the time.
Right.
But they call them the greatest.
Right.
Failure is looked at in our society as a negative thing. How can we change the storyline so that people can start looking at the failure without the dejection that they get from it and start accepting it as just an opportunity for growth?
Right.
That didn't work that way, so let's shift, let's change some things.
Sure.
And try to, how do we do that?
It's removing the stigma of failure, right? As I said, removing the stigma of mental health or asking for mental health services. It's about removing the stigma. Just because failure is an opportunity to learn. I didn't lose, I learned. We have to change the language. We have to understand that words have meaning. So calling someone a loser or saying you lost, I didn't lose, I just learned. And I learned how to be better the next time. And we just have to change the language, change the way that we engage those who don't hit the mark every single time, right? So we have to change the way that we engage in that process and creating opportunity. And what I mean by that is if we create opportunities for success, creating those opportunities for success involves learning how to fail and learning how to recover from failure. I know that sounds very oxymoronic, learning how to fail, but if you don't know how to fall down, anyone who has ever practiced martial arts, one of the first things they teach you how to do is how to fall. Because you can't learn all the other things unless you learn how to fall. So once you master that, you can then learn how to be successful. Once you learn how to successfully fail, then you can be successful.
This is my friend right here, none other than Dr. Robert Clark, the safety director of the city of Columbus. I just want to take this opportunity to thank you for coming in and just sitting down and talking with me.
I appreciate you, brother.
Sharing
Thank you.
your thoughts. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's
You
a pleasure.
are
All
a
mine.
value to our community.
Thank you, sir.
And I thank you for your service most of all.
Yeah.
You've given a lot, you've sacrificed a lot, and I just want you to know that I, for one, appreciate it.
I'm honored to be here. The first time I met you and talked to you, I believed that I was coming to you as a vessel, only to end up as a receptacle. So I'm so blessed for everything that you pour into my life and to the lives of those who believe in you.
Amen. God bless you.
Yeah.
That is one good cup of coffee.
This has been a production of the GMFC Studios. God bless you.